3 gestures, 3 calculated provocations, and the third made Simeone explode in the Metropolitano locker room, to the point of shouting in front of the whole team. What Julián Álvarez did today is the most surprising thing we have seen in all this Kulbrin, and what happened later in that locker room we are going to tell you now. Stay, like and subscribe so you don't miss the end of this story. The workers of the Metropolitano saw Julián leave totally alone after the game. We know why, and now you too. Like it if you think Julián is going to end up at Barca, and subscribe because when it happens you're going to find out first. Julián Álvarez arrived at the Metropolitano today with a very clear plan. None of what happened was improvisation or any kind of coincidence. It was a plan executed gesture by gesture, with a coldness and a determination that left all those who were close completely speechless throughout the long day at the Metropolitano. 3 very concrete gestures, 3 provocations calculated with precision, each one more daring than the previous one, each one designed to tighten the rope a little more, and each one with Simeone until El Cholo exploded in a way that could not be ignored in any way, that could not be managed with a press release, that could not be resolved with a press conference where Simeone said that Julián is very important for the project and that they need him to compete. The first of the 3 gestures took place even before arriving at the Metropolitano Stadium. Simeone has a ritual that he has been maintaining for years with religiosity before each game. When the team gets on the bus on the way to the stadium, he stands at the main entrance of the vehicle and greets each player who gets on, one by one. He shakes his hand, looks him in the eye, says something important to him. It is a small but very significant gesture within the internal dynamics of the red and white group, a way to connect with each player just before the game, to remind him that he is there as a coach, to convey confidence or demand, depending on what that particular player needs at that specific moment. All the players of Atlético de Madrid know that ritual perfectly. They have been getting on the bus by the same door for years for that same gesture with El Cholo before each official game. It is part of Simeone's way of being, part of what makes him different from other coaches. All but Julián Álvarez this afternoon at the Metropolitano. When it was Julián's turn to get on the bus, the Argentine striker did not approach the main door where Simeone was waiting for each player. As usual, he turned around the bus completely, looking for another entrance. He found one of the rear doors of the vehicle and got on there, alone, completely avoiding contact with Simeone. Without the usual ritual greeting, without the visual contact that all his teammates had had with the coach before getting on the bus to the Metropolitano. Simeone saw him perfectly from his position at the bus door. Everyone who was inside the vehicle saw him too. The gesture was impossible to ignore for anyone, and El Cholo said absolutely nothing at that moment. He let it pass this time without saying anything. The accumulated tension of the last few weeks forced him to measure every public reaction very carefully and with a lot of strategic coldness. A public explosion on the bus on the way to the game would have been exactly what Julián wanted to achieve at that moment. An easy and devastating opener for the entire Spanish sports press even before the game began. An image of Simeone losing control even before reaching the Metropolitano Stadium. El Cholo calculated it in a fraction of a second and decided to let it pass this time, but he wrote it down mentally and did not forget it. What no one inside the bus knew at that moment was that this gesture was only the first of 3, that Julián had not finished or gone far, that what would come later during the game and at the end of the game would climb in such a fast and forceful way that no one inside Atlético Madrid was minimally prepared to manage it without serious consequences for everyone. To understand what happened later during the game, it is necessary to understand the exact context in which Julián was moving today at the Metropolitano. It is also necessary to understand what exactly Julián is looking for with all this, because if there is something that has been very clear in the last few weeks of this snake, it is that Julián has a very specific and very well-defined goal from the beginning. To force Simeone to a point of no return from which it is no longer possible to maintain the public stance that everything is going well at Atlético. To take it to a limit from which the conflict is so visible and so difficult to manage internally that the club has no choice but to open a real negotiation with Barca before the closure of the market. And to achieve all that, Julián needs Simeone to really explode, to do it in a way that everyone can see. Tonight at the Metropolitano, Julián finally got it. He has been the protagonist of the most media snake in Spanish football for many years. He has taken his case to FIFA. He has appeared with the Barca shirt in the parking lot of Cerro del Espino in front of the cameras of the world. He has seen how 5 of his most untouchable teammates refused to train in solidarity with him. He has received the suspension of employment and salary with 3 devastating conditions that Simeone personally designed in an emergency meeting. And yet he is here today at the Metropolitano, called for the game by Simeone himself within the Rojiblanco group, with the Atlético shirt on like all his teammates. But that presence within the group does not mean that he has accepted the situation in any way. It means exactly the opposite. It means that Julián has decided that if he is going to be at Atlético while the snake lasts, he is going to be there in a way that makes it impossible to ignore what is happening every day. That every day that passes inside the club will remind Simeone and the managers that the situation is not resolved, that the problem is still there with all its strength, that the signing market closes very soon, and that someone within Atlético has to make a decision before it is too late. The second gesture came at the break of the game. The team entered the locker room at the break of the game. Simeone was waiting inside to give the tactical talk of the second half, as he always does. The players were arriving at the locker room one by one, sweaty and focused. The coaching staff prepared the board with the tactical corrections for the second half, and Simeone began to speak to his team. Julián did not enter the locker room. While Simeone gave the tactical talk to the team inside the Metropolitano locker room, Julián Álvarez stayed outside in the field with a ball throwing at the door, quietly, alone, in total silence, completely ignoring what was happening inside the locker room. As if the coach's talk was not with him, as if the game that was being played was not too much with him either. What Simeone felt at that precise moment, when he was informed that Julián had not entered the locker room like the rest of the team, is something that those who were close describe as an absolute cold running from top to bottom. El Cholo finished the talk without mentioning the matter. He went out to the field to direct the second half, and when he left, Julián was already sitting quietly on the bench, waiting as if absolutely nothing had happened during the break. Simeone's face at that moment when he left the locker room said it all to anyone who looked at him carefully. He had endured 2 gestures on the same day, that of the bus in the morning, that of the field at the break, and he was clear that he was not going to endure a third without reacting in any way. What came after the game was what ended up breaking everything definitively and irreversibly, and it is what we tell now in the next part of this exclusive story. The game ended in the Wanda Metropolitano. The players of Atlético de Madrid entered the locker room as they do after each home game. Simeone came in last of all, as he always does. It is another of his unwavering rituals of 15 years. He enters when all his players are already inside the locker room, closes the door calmly, and begins the final talk of the game. That post-match talk is absolutely sacred within Atlético de Madrid since Simeone arrived at the club. He has been like this for 15 years without exception, win or lose, at home or away, with the team on the run or in the middle of a crisis. Simeone speaks and the locker room listens. Nobody answers the phone. Parallel conversations do not exist. The locker room listens to the coach in total silence. It is an unwritten rule that all players who have passed through Atlético know from the first day. Julián knew it perfectly. When Simeone entered the locker room, the players were already in the process of changing their game equipment. The atmosphere was exactly what it is after a match played in the Metropolitano. Visible physical fatigue, accumulated tension of 90 minutes on the grass. Each player processing what had happened on the field in his own way, in silence. And Simeone began to speak to the group as usual. Julián listened to the first seconds of the talk sitting in his usual place in the locker room and then got up without saying absolutely anything. He went to the bathroom directly. He took a shower calmly. He returned to his place in the locker room. He changed his training clothes for street clothes with total tranquility. He put on his shoes, and when he was completely ready to leave the stadium at any time, he took the phone out of his pocket and started looking at the screen while Simeone was still talking to the team that surrounded him. He completely ignored Simeone. The phone screen was the only thing that existed for him at that moment. I was there with the street clothes on and the phone in my hand while Cholo was talking to his players, as if the coach's words were not with him. What happened in the following seconds is something that the workers of the Metropolitano, who were near the locker room at that time, will not forget for a long time. Simeone stopped talking. In the middle of a sentence, he was silent, and the whole locker room was silent with him. Each player looking at the coach, and the coach looking at Julián. Cholo went towards him, crossing the locker room with slow and deliberate steps, and he told him to leave the locker room right now, that he did not want to see him step on that locker room again while he was as a coach of Atlético. The exact words of that conversation, we do not know them in their entirety. But the tone and the message came with absolute and unequivocal clarity to each and every one of the players who were inside at that moment. Julián got up. He took his things and left, alone, without his teammates, without anyone accompanying him to the exit of the stadium. The workers of the Metropolitano who were in the locker room area that night saw him leave through the hallway of the stadium with his bag in his hand and without saying absolutely nothing to anyone who crossed with him on the way. An image that absolutely no one expected to see that night at the Wanda Metropolitano after a league game. There is something about what happened in that locker room that deserves to be analyzed very calmly. Because Julián did not take the phone out of care or distraction. What he did was the third gesture of the three planned. The most calculated and the most surgical of all. The one that had more chances of exploiting Simeone precisely because he attacked directly something that El Cholo considers more sacred within his way of working and understanding football. The ritual of the post-match locker room. The moment when the team listens to the coach. The space where Simeone builds the unity of the group week after week. Ignoring that moment with the phone was ignoring everything that Simeone represents within Atlético. And Julián knew it perfectly when he took out that phone. The two previous gestures of the day, Simeone had endured them with a coldness that cost him a huge effort of self-control. The bus gesture left him thinking that reacting publicly before the game was not the smartest or most useful thing in that delicate moment. The field gesture at the break was managed by finishing the tactical talk and going out to the field for the second half without making any public reference to the matter in front of the group. But the third came in the only space where Simeone is not willing to give up ground under any known circumstance. The locker room is his. He has built it brick by brick during 15 years of work. And no one inside that locker room ignores him while he talks to the group. No one had ever done it in all those years until tonight in the Metropolitano. What Simeone is going to do in the next few hours after this explosion and what this third calculated gesture by Julián means for the immediate future of the longest and most media of Spanish football in recent years is what we are going to tell you now in the last part of this exclusive story. For the fans of Atlético who saw the game tonight from the stands or from home and who are going to read tomorrow in all the sports media what happened in the locker room, there is something very important to understand before making hasty conclusions. This is not a punctual locker room crisis that is solved with a conversation and a pat on the back. This is the direct result of weeks of accumulated tension that have reached a point where there are no more patches or Simeone statements saying that Julián is very important and that they need him to compete in Europe. What Julián did tonight with the three gestures executed one after the other throughout the day was exactly that, to force the definitive breaking point to take the situation to a place where Atlético has to make a real decision about the future of the player. Where continuing to block his departure has such a high cost for the locker room and for the public image of the club that the negotiation with Barca becomes the only reasonable exit that remains for Atlético. And Simeone exploiting in the locker room and throwing Julián in front of the whole team tonight is exactly that breaking point that Julián had been looking for weeks. Because now Atlético has a new problem and very serious on the table to manage. Simeone has thrown a player from his own locker room in front of the whole team. That player is still officially an Atlético player with a contract in force until 2030. The signing market closes in a matter of days and the public image of the club continues to deteriorate with each new episode of this snake that seems to have no end in sight. Inside Atlético tonight there are people who understand with total clarity that something has to change urgently. That the situation has already exceeded any reasonable limit of internal management of the conflict. That the institutional and sporting cost of continuing to block Julián's departure is already greater than the cost of selling him to Barca and closing this chapter. And that time ends implacably with each passing day without anyone making a definitive decision. In Barcelona, Deco knows it. Laporta knows it. And both are waiting for that conviction inside Atlético to be translated into a call. A single call. The one that opens the real negotiation. The one that allows this summer snake to finally reach its final chapter. Subscribe and like, because what happens in the next few hours inside Atlético Madrid will determine if Julián Álvarez plays for FC Barcelona this season that has just begun. And this channel will be there when it happens. before anyone else in the world of football. Simeone has been 15 years at Atlético Madrid without anyone doing something like this to him inside a changing room. 15 years building a daily work culture that everyone and each of the players who have passed through Atlético have respected to a greater or lesser extent. 15 years being the most respected coach and most feared, equally, of all Spanish and European football. And tonight, Julián Álvarez broke everything in 90 minutes with 3 calculated gestures that El Cholo simply could not ignore anymore. What Simeone does right now is the most important question of all this long summer's snake. Because Simeone has options on the table. He can treat this as one more disciplinary incident within the conflict that he has been managing with difficulty. He can tighten more the conditions that he already put on the table. He can harden even more the employment and salary suspension. He can try to get the situation back to the starting point, as if tonight in the Metropolitano nothing relevant had happened that changes the board of the conflict. But there is something that tonight changed in a completely irreversible way within Atlético Madrid that no subsequent disciplinary management can undo or minimize. The dressing room saw it all from their places. The 5 untouchables that a few days ago refused to train out of solidarity with Julián saw it all without being able to do anything. Oblak saw it from his dressing room corner. Koch saw it. Barrios saw it. Llorente saw it. Luckman saw it. And they all know perfectly well that Simeone kicked Julián out of the dressing room tonight with the signing market closing in a matter of days. That generates a very complicated dynamic within the group that Simeone will have to manage very carefully, and with a lot of intelligence in the next few hours and in the next few days in the face of the upcoming matches. Because the players who openly stood by Julián's side a few days ago have not changed position since then, and to see how his partner leaves the dressing room alone tonight, while the signing market is definitively closing, will not put more of Simeone's or Atlético's side in this conflict. What Julián achieved tonight with the 3 gestures goes far beyond exploiting Cholo. He made the situation so visible and so difficult to ignore that Atlético Madrid can no longer manage this conflict in silence. They can no longer follow the strategy of public statements where Simeone says that Julián is very important while inside the conflict continues without being resolved. There is a very concrete and undeniable reality that Atlético Madrid has to look directly tonight without looking elsewhere. The signing market closes in very few days. Julián has not played official matches in a relevant way for the team for weeks. Simeone has just left the dressing room in front of the whole team with the market still open, and Barca has the economic offer ready and waiting on the deck. In that specific scenario, the question that Gilmarin has to ask tonight honestly is not whether Julián deserves to be treated this way or not. The real and urgent question is how much it costs Atlético Madrid to continue blocking this market operation. How much does it cost to have your best striker in open war with the dressing room and with the coach? How much does it cost institutionally for a new episode of The Snake to appear every week, generating negative headlines about the club in all of Europe and all over the football world? And how much does it cost to have Cholo exploiting in the dressing room and shouting players when the team needs all the concentration in the world to compete in the Champions League? That is the exact calculation that Atlético has to make tonight with all the honesty possible. And there are important people inside the club who have been doing that same calculation in private for weeks and always reaching the same conclusion every time they review it. That selling Julián Álvarez to FC Barcelona for €100 million with the market still open for a few more days is clearly better for Atlético than everything that is happening right now inside and outside the club. Julián left the dressing room of the Metropolitano tonight with his bag in his hand through the long corridor of the stadium without any member of the club accompanying him to his car parked outside the stadium. It was the loneliest and hardest image of any snake that has already had too many difficult and complicated images to see. But there is something in that lonely image of this night that deserves to be said clearly before closing this story. Julián left only the dressing room of the Metropolitano, and the next day of this night, the summer signings market is still open, even if it is for a very short time. Icos is still waiting for a call, and Laporta is still waiting in Barcelona with the project ready, and Barca is still wanting Julián Álvarez as their center forward. That is the image of someone completely willing to pay any personal price to get what he wants with all his soul. The image of someone who has not lost tonight, even if it seems like it from outside the dressing room, who has shown tonight with the 3 gestures that his determination to leave Atlético and get to Barca has no known limit, and that if it is necessary to provoke Simeone in his own dressing room with the phone in his hand in front of the team, he will do it without hesitation a single second, and that if it is necessary to leave the stadium alone through the corridor while the rest of the team is inside, he will also do it with the same calmness. There is something else that deserves to be said about what happened tonight before closing, because Julián did not act alone nor improvisedly. Behind these three gestures of the day, there are weeks of careful planning. There are deep conversations with the people of his closest environment. There is a clear and defined strategy that has been escalating episode by episode from the first moment of this long summer. The Barca shirt in the parking of Cerro del Espino was the first chapter of the story. The police at the doors of the facilities was the second. FIFA was the third of a series that did not seem to have an end. The rebellion of the 5 untouchables of the dressing room was the fourth. The suspension of employment and salary and the 3 conditions of Simeone was the fifth. And tonight in the Metropolitano, with the 3 perfectly calculated gestures and the expulsion of the dressing room, the 6th chapter of all has arrived. Each chapter more extreme than the previous one. Each one designed to tighten the situation a little more until the athlete cannot stand it anymore. Julián has been showing for weeks that he has patience, that he has a determination that no obstacle of the summer has managed to stop at all. And that every time the athlete raises the bet, he also raises it without blinking for a moment. Tonight, Simeone raised the bet, throwing him out of the dressing room in front of the whole team. And in the next few hours, the world of football will see the answer of Julián to that extreme movement. Because Julián always responds in some way, and he always does it in a way that no one inside or outside of the Athletic calculated in advance. That has been the constant pattern of all this convulsive summer. And that pattern tonight has been repeated again punctually in the Metropolitano. The longest and most intense summer of Spanish football arrives tonight at the most extreme moment of all the Culebron. What happens in the next few hours inside the Atlético de Madrid will write the final chapter of the story that has been in vilo to all Spanish football for weeks. This channel will be there when it happens. Subscribe and like, because the end of this Culebron is closer than ever, and when it finally arrives you will know it here before anywhere else in football.